Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me, first of all, express my appreciation for being in your midst this afternoon. Of course, to discuss topical issues that bother some emerging markets, which are essentially placed on Africa is the emerging market. He's fully introduced me, and incidentally, I'm just 2 months in Shanghai. I came from United States last 2 months when fortune smiled on me. They got an appointment to be the Ambassador Consul General of Nigeria in Shanghai. Thank you. I just want to share some perspectives as an African, as a diplomat of over 26 years, like he rightly put it. So what China-Africa relationship has done so far, and what are the potentials, and where we are looking at, what are the prognosis, who we are looking as the emerging market. The alignment of Africa's natural resource endowments with China's core economic interests has placed Africa at the center of an emerging geopolitical tension. In the first decade of 21st century, China is likely to succeed in securing economic and political ties to African nations. Of course, that rival, if not displaced relations that Europe-American nations have, of course, dominated over 150 years of colonial rule and neo-colonial influence. The recent explosion of commerce between China and countries of sub-Saharan Africa is a striking hallmark of the new trend in South-South trade and investment. Indeed, this acceleration in exchange among developing countries is one of the most significant features of current global economy. For decades, world trade has been dominated by commerce both among developed countries, the North and between the North, and developing countries of the South. Developmental models being rolled out in key African countries, like special economic zones, and others, are there to provide liberalized investment focused on strategic industries that attract foreign companies. The model of dedicated geographical zones where investing companies enjoy preferential economic policies is by no means unique. Numerous African countries, Nigeria inclusive, have established or are establishing such zones in their countries, and in an attempt to attract foreign direct investment to their various countries and the continent in particular, especially in labor-intensive manufacturing industries. Let me pause in why. For instance, my country, Nigeria, well, historically, they say is a representative of the black race. And the statistics have it that anywhere you see 5 blacks, 1 person is a Nigerian, given a number. And I don't want to blow a trumpet. I just came from United States. This is verifiable. Nigerians are great migrants. In fact, education-wise, statistics have it that Nigerians are the most educated migrants in the United States, including US themselves. Average Nigerian doesn't stop in his first degree. I'm only saying this because Nigeria, Africa is blessed. Not just other in terms of human resources and natural resources. Nigeria is blessed with, we're known for oil, gas, and lots of other natural resources, which I'm here to discuss and share with all of us. Having said that, Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt, Mauritius are the most proactive on the continent in establishing such economic zones. Like I said, it's all aimed at attracting foreign direct investment. And then China's expensive political, economic, and military engagements in Africa reflects an increasingly dynamic and accommodating approach towards the continent. There are now about over 1 million Chinese people in Africa. China and sub-Saharan Africa has rapidly intensified their relationship since the late 1990s, and in 2013, China became the largest sub-Saharan exporter and developmental partner. China now represents about a quarter of sub-Saharan trade, up from 2.3% in 1985. About 1/3 of China's energy imports come from sub-Saharan Africa. A vital that's grown by more than twice the trade link, especially as energy consumption rates in China have grown by more than twice the global average in the last 10 years. Despite increased efficiency and rising domestic production, rapid urbanization and heavy industrialization continue to spur robust Chinese demand for coal, oil and gas, just to name a few. And then China's Bank of China, notably the People Bank of China, the China Development Bank, the Export-Import Bank of China, Exim Bank of China, has supported large-scale investment in African infrastructure. More than 2,200 Chinese enterprises are currently operating in sub-Saharan Africa. Most of them private firms, as quoted by UNTAD 2014 and Shen 2014 also. Of course, diplomatic contacts, bilateral aid and cooperation initiatives have greatly expanded over the years. And Forum on China-African Cooperation, formed in 2000, and convenes every 3 years, have become the primary institutional vehicle for China's strategic engagement with sub-Saharan Africa. Now, is Africa the next emerging market? I want us to pause a while and listen to me. From my own perspective, David McDonald, founder of the Global Millennial Encore, has argued that a drastic shift towards financial sustainability is currently happening right now in Africa, which is leading many financial analysts to indeed call it the next emerging market. Risk falls and telecommunication capacities rise. Africa is quickly becoming a viable place for investment and investors, especially when you take into account the world's fastest growing population found in Africa. For instance, in 2013, China has invested over $26 billion into Africa. But in 2017, Chinese President Xi Jinping offered a whopping $60 billion loan and aid package to Africa and the sub-Saharan continent. According to several sources, Xi Jinping is being quoted as saying that China aims to develop infrastructure, improve agriculture, and reduce poverty on the continent of Africa. This should now come as no surprise to anybody, considering that the 900 billion New Silk Road project that China aims to embark on, which will create numerous new trade routes, as well as build up old trade routes throughout the Middle East and Asia. In total, nearly $3 billion in private equity has been raised so far in 2017 for Africa, outside that of BRICS countries. To this shows that investors in the emerging equity market are also developing a taste for Africa, with global emerging market funds developing nearly 10% of their portfolios on the continent. What was once a risky and low return investment is now looking much more promising as far as sub-Saharan Africa is concerned to investors, something that was simply not the case some few years ago. Now, so what exactly is going on? Having said all this, let me break it a little further. What actually is happening? Has Africa actually changed, or is there just so much money sloshing about that bets is on? From research and perspective, Africa has definitely changed in the last decade. What was once countries searching for an identity is now a growing market for investment banks and bustling infrastructure projects, But external factors certainly do play a role as well. And of course, this is expected, it's natural. International conditions and low use of, from of course, Organization of Economic Coordinated Development Countries, high liquidity and the search for high return, or, of course, lure investors into the arms of ever riskier investments. But at the end of the day, they know that there will be appropriate return for whatever risks they've put in investing in sub-Saharan Africa. Furthermore, investment opportunity has grown tremendously in African countries. Only 66 firms were listed on sub-Saharan stock exchange in the year 2000, while there are now 522. Look at that gap. This statistics is verifiable. Another great reason for foreign investment in Africa. Then as put by Organization for Economic Cooperation for Development, it says, further investment opportunities have grown tremendously in African countries. Okay, fine. Something new is happening as now even the hedge funds are getting into the action. Tudo Investment took a risk in African Opportunities Partners, a vehicle for investing in Tanzanian beer, Senegalese telecoms, and insurance companies in India. And also, Chinese are investing a lot of money in Nigeria. The Swiss financier Nicholas Clevel launched the first hedge fund in Europe, entirely dedicated to Africa on July 2007. The Scorpion African Opportunities Fund, with the aim of raising 700 million. The reason for all this new investment has to do with the fact that financial information and communication infrastructure are also improving a great deal in the sub-Saharan continent. And so much so that Renadas Capital's analysts can cover over a dozen sub-Saharan local equity markets, a feat that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. This was said by Javier Santiso of the OECD Economic Institution. Then, China-Nigeria relationship. This is how I look at it. No bilateral China-African relationship is evolving faster or impacting more people than the one between my country and China, Nigeria. The Asian giant going global meets the African giant who aims to become one of the top 20 economies in year 2020. From less than $2 billion in year 2000, trade between China and Nigeria reached nearly 18 billion just 10 years later. Between 2003 and 2009, Nigeria has a top destination for Chinese foreign direct investment on the continent, second only to South Africa. Its attractions are clear: vast energy reserves and a large domestic market of over 180 million inhabitants with growing disposable incomes. For Nigeria, incentives lie in China's own successful economic transformation, its capacity to deliver large-scale infrastructure projects, and more importantly, its ability to also finance them. While initially driven by its vast demand for energy resources, China's involvement in Nigeria has since expanded far beyond oil. Like I said before, they're into infrastructure building, oil, developing the economic zones. They're into a lot of things. So China's public and private companies are making forays into Nigerian manufacturing and information and communication technology sectors. They are also developing two special economic zones within Nigeria and are building roads, railways, airports across the country. China is also known for its policy of offering unconditional aid, what it calls cooperation. To me, we say it's an unconditional aid, but to them it's cooperation. And of course, that comes with a lot of advantages. To help in reaching development of goals. In an effort to boost Nigeria's agricultural output, hundreds of Chinese specialists are also bringing new technologies and techniques to bear in all this in trying to assist us in the development of our economy. Essentially, both countries stand to gain significantly from their economic engagements. However, some few Nigerians have expressed dissatisfaction with the labor practices of some Chinese companies, the quality of cheap imported goods, and the impact of those imports on domestic producers. Though Chinese investors are less risk-averse than others, this also is an advantage. Despite some arguable disputes, the two countries definitely continue to assert their mutual friendship and goodwill. Ultimately, these problems will have to be addressed frontally if this powerful South-South alliance is to help both countries achieve sustainable economic goals. China-Nigeria investment is not a one-way street, but as we trade, the traffic in the opposite direction is much leaner. So although on a smaller scale, Nigerian companies and investors making forays into the Chinese market, direct investment by African countries totaled nearly 10 billion by the end of 2009. And Beijing lists Nigeria among the top 5 African countries that are doing business with. In 2010, for instance, First Bank of Nigeria PLC, First Bank is our Apex Bank, has been able to penetrate the Chinese market. Other Nigerian banks that followed after them is Zenith Bank, Access Bank. They've also followed, and steps are either in China, they're either operating in Beijing or in Shanghai. The banks offer an array of services to its customers in Asia, including Chinese companies seeking to enter the Nigerian market. Aside from the banks, undoubtedly, some private businessmen and Nigerians in diaspora are also engaged in exporting Chinese products to Nigeria. Finally, major agreements that have been signed between Chinese government and Nigerian government. Some of them I may not be able to itemize them, but there has been lots of major agreements signed by both countries. There's agreement on trade, investment, promotion, and protection. That was 2001. There's memorandum of understanding on strategic partnership. There's also a memorandum of understanding on peace and cooperation, 2010, and etc., etc. I've given out this little paper in case some of us want more reference on what I've said. I won't be able to itemize all of them because of time. Now, one of the most significant and remarkable achievements under the leadership of the Nigerian President, Muhammadu Buhari, after meeting the President Xi Jinping last year on a state visit here in China, after which there's protocol agreements on various areas of cooperation and assistance we signed. According to Garba Shehu, who is the President Media Assistant, I quote him, he said, these included, for example, 1 billion Abuja-Ibadan Abuja-Ibadan-Lagos Greenfield Expressway, a 300 megawatt solar plant in Shiroro. This is a railway project. Floating gas facilities, just to mention a few. Then our CBN governor, that's governor of our central bank, Godwin Emefiele, also noted that the agreements on currency swap with Chinese government, we believe that using the renminbi will improve trade with China as a whole. And this will encourage imports and importers to open up, of course, local purchasing order in the Chinese currency. Instead of going through dollar, Nigerians can now do business direct using Chinese currency. This is a very commendable and laudable initiative by the both leaders. Africa definitely has changed, however, and is indeed one of the next emerging markets. That's my position. Growth in sub-Saharan Africa is forecast to pick up to 2.6% in 2017 and 3.2% in 2018. Predicated on moderately rising commodity prices and reforms to tackle macroeconomic imbalances, per capita outcome is projected to shrink by 0.1% in 2017 and to increase to a modest 0.7% growth pace over 2018 and 2019. This does not mean that all problems will suddenly disappear in the continent, as at those rates, growth rates will be insufficient to achieve poverty reduction goals in the region, particularly if constraints to more vigorous growth continue to persist. However, the fact that governments are modifying their policies and encouraging private investment in viable and profitable projects with a lasting impact on development means that the trend of economic growth in the continent will not be one that is short-lived. So, I'm speaking with a lot of hope. I end it by saying, expect Africa to change more in the next century than it has in the past. Thank you for your attention.